So now that the weather is getting colder and everybody's about to chill on the couch for the holidays, it's a lot harder to make the right start sit decisions, especially in one of the most important weeks of fantasy football. Luckily for you, in this video, I break down everything, the only start sit video you're going to need, because I look at matchups based on sportsbook odds with player and game projections, the best and worst cornerback matchups so we know exactly where to get that edge, the weather reports of what we're even expected to see. Are the rain is going to affect this game? Is snow going to affect this game? And so much more. If you appreciate all the analytical numbers and time and research that go into this video, hit that like button and subscribe if you are new to get this video every single week and join all of us as fantasy champions going into the season. Starting with the Green Bay Packers and the Detroit Lions, we can see there is a ton of games on Thanksgiving on Thursday. We start with this one. The Packers are actually projected to lose this game, not by a ton though. You can see the over under and the total here is relatively high for the week, and it should be close. We look at the weather, there is none. It is an indoor stadium. The Lions are home, so absolutely no worries there. We look into the actual numbers of this matchup though. The Green Bay Packers, you can see a lot of green. So all of these numbers in parentheses are showing how positive the other defense is to that position. So we can see the Lions, for example, they are top 10 in fantasy points allowed to quarterbacks, wide receivers, and they're really tough against running backs. Here we can see it looks like we are going to have Josh Jacobs healthy, ready, good to go in this matchup. So he is going to be a must start, even though he does have one of the more negative matchups this week. The Detroit Lions are actually the #1 toughest in allowing fantasy points to that position. Luckily, he does get a good amount of receiving work to not make him that much of an issue. Jordan Love gets a good matchup, but he's not necessarily a must start for me. He is relatively boom or bust, and he doesn't have a ton of upside in the rushing game either. But again, if you need it, he's a fine start. We also have all of these wide receivers. Matthew Golden is questionable coming into this matchup. Christian Watson is acting as the wide receiver 1. You can see here he has a little bit more of a negative matchup. We will get into that. These on the right side are all of the cornerbacks that are matched up against these wide receivers. I know you guys absolutely love that, and nobody really talks about it on YouTube, but it is really important. We can see Romeo Doubs gets another positive matchup against Teron Arnold, and Amik Robinson for Matthew Golden. But we see here the Lions defense is actually pretty good versus the slot wide receivers. So that is Matthew Golden. You can see here his cornerback matchup is actually kind of positive, but as far as a total defense in a collective in the scheme they run, they don't allow a lot of fantasy points to the slot position specifically. So I would not be going through starting Matthew Golden. He may get a few catches and break something off. That's just the way the Packers offense run. But you can see here overall they are very positive to the wide receivers, and the Lions are very tough in fantasy points allowed to the tight ends. Musgrave is not even the tight end 1 anymore. It is a 3 tight end committee. Do not start any of those guys. We can go down and look at the Lions side of things. Jared Goff. All of these guys are in the red. The Packers defense is very good. They do not allow a lot of fantasy points to anybody. So Jared Goff is going to be one of those fringe guys. He is playing good enough to, again, where you can put him in your starting lineup, but he's not a top 10 quarterback for me this week. Jahmyr Gibbs always going to be started. This is a matchup where I would lean towards sitting David Montgomery. He is going to be saved by a touchdown. If he doesn't get one of those, probably going to be a disappointment in fantasy football. But you look at the wide receivers here. The Packers defense have been extremely strong, especially over the last 4 games. If we look at the last month, they are really tough in allowing fantasy points to wide receivers. So this is a spot where Jameson Williams against Valentine is not one where I want to go through and start him. Again, this kind of ties into the Jared Goff situation. I expect both of them to have a bit more of a down game. Amon-Ra is obviously always going to be started. Brock Wright does get the most positive out of the entire defensive matchup here, but he hasn't really generated enough fantasy points for us to worry about him in our starting lineups just yet. But then we drop it down to another Thursday Thanksgiving Day game with the Chiefs and the Cowboys. This one's going to be good. I am a Commanders fan, so I'm hoping the Cowboys lose this one. But again, this is one of, if not the highest game total of the week at 52 points. We want to take pieces from these games that are really high scoring because it insinuates that there's a lot more upside, and the books always know more than we do. And you can see this game is projected to be very close as well, but we do have some injuries to go over. It is another indoor stadium. The Cowboys are home, so no weather concerns there. I will tell you there are a lot of weather concerns with rain as we get deeper into this video, so make sure to stick around for that. But you can see here, we know the Cowboys defense is extremely positive in literally everything. You can see Patrick Mahomes, the #1 most fantasy points allowed to quarterbacks. They're also top 3 to wide receivers and pretty up there for running backs as well. So we're really starting all of these guys. Isaiah Pacheco may or may not play. If he doesn't play, Kareem Hunt is going to be a start. If he does, they're both going to be fringe flex guys. I don't really love it though because of how much of a committee it is. You're going to be hoping that they fall into the end zone. Rashee Rice is questionable coming into this matchup. It does look like he is going to play. He gets the most positive cornerback matchup of the week, as we can see. But if he does not end up playing, Xavier Worthy is going to be a must start. As you can see down here in the notes here, the Cowboys, they can stop slot wide receivers at a decent rate, and that is Hollywood Brown. So we're not going to be starting Hollywood Brown in this one. Again, he's going to need a 50-yard touchdown or nothing, but they are extremely positive to everything else in the outside wide receivers, especially the wide receivers that play on the left side of the field, and that is Xavier Worthy. So this could be a spot where Xavier Worthy has a good game, especially if there's no Rashee Rice, and Travis Kelce can be started as well. 14th most fantasy points allowed by this Cowboys defense. You look at the other side of things with the Cowboys here, it is a lot of red. The Chiefs defense is very good. They hold teams to one of the lowest point and yard totals in the entire NFL on a per week basis. Dak Prescott can be started. He's going to need to pass a ton, again, because of how high this projected game total is. Even though it's a negative matchup, he's going to carry a lot more risk, but still could be in our starting lineups. Same thing with Javonte Williams and the rest of these wide receivers. We can see here the Chiefs defense is strong really everywhere against the pass, but slightly weak against those wide receivers on the right side, and that is CeeDee Lamb. Not like he needs a super positive matchup to be fantasy viable, but we've seen CeeDee Lamb be kind of outshined by George Pickens so far this year, so they can both be started even though they get negative matchups against Watson and McDuffie. Ferguson, I would be a little bit more worried about because his target share has dropped a lot since CeeDee Lamb has come back. But again, with all this pass volume, if you need a tight end, and I know the position is very bleak this year, he can be an option for you. Another Thanksgiving Day game. This one is an outdoor stadium. The Ravens are home. It is going to be pretty cold here. As you can see, 36 degrees. Not much wind though, no rain projected, so absolutely no weather concerns here. Yes, it's cold, but they're NFL players. They can play through it. We see both of these defenses look relatively positive in fantasy points allowed, but the Ravens defense has been very good. They've been turning it up over the last month of the season. You can see they're bottom 10 in fantasy points allowed to wide receivers over those last 4 games. So as you can see, the entire wide receiver group here looks like they're positive, but if we put it in that 4-week spectrum, they are getting a lot better. So Chase Brown is going to be a start in this matchup because the Ravens' run defense still isn't that good. Joe Burrow is coming back into this matchup. I've seen a bunch of people ask if he's a start this week. If you have another quarterback option, I would lean with them. I think Joe Burrow is going to be perfectly fine. As we can see here, it's a 52-point game total. The Ravens are expected to win by a touchdown, and we know this Bengals defense is absolutely atrocious, so Joe Burrow and this entire offense should be passing a ton. Again, we love these high point totals, so Burrow can be started. I'm not insanely worried about him as long as all of the reports as the week comes out tells us that he's going to be fully healthy and good to go. But we don't have T. Higgins this week because he is out with a concussion, and that is going to help Andre Yoshivas in this matchup, getting one against Murphy. Also, Jamar Chase against Wouzier. That is the most positive corner matchup for these wide receivers specifically. But Andre Yoshivas can definitely be a plug-and-play flex guy for us. We had him in the waiver wire video this week as well for this exact reason. The Ravens defense, yes, is getting better, but again, there's going to have to be a bunch of passing, and we've seen in games without T. Higgins in the entire career of Andre Yoshivas, he's had 5 touchdowns in those 6 games. There's a lot of upside there, but we do know when T. Higgins is out, the target share towards the tight ends absolutely skyrockets. So even though Mike Gesicki has a really negative matchup, there is an opportunity to for him to get some points. But again, I'm not throwing him into our starting lineup because it is a negative matchup, and that's the way the Ravens run their defense. You look at the Ravens side of things here, very positive. We just talked about how good this Bengals defense is in allowing fantasy points. Lamar Jackson gets a top 3 matchup. Derrick Henry is the number 1 best matchup of the week against this run defense. But you see these wide receivers, a little bit of a negative situation here against this pass defense, which you might be surprised about because the Bengals defense are just considerably bad and nobody really considers that. But they're actually good versus the wide receivers on the right side of the field, which is going to be Zay Flowers. So he does carry a bit more boom bust risk against DJ Turner this week. Technically, Rashad Bateman does have the more positive one against Daxton Hill. They're weak everywhere else outside of that one right wide receiver spot because of the corner matchup. But he's still a flex borderline guy. I would not start Rashad Bateman. Again, he's going to be a touchdown or bust, which could happen considering the high game total. Isaiah Likely and Mark Andrews, though, I really do like. I would start Mark Andrews over Likely this week. All of the sports books have his line at 4.5 receptions, which is one of the highest, I think the highest he's been put at this year because it is the number 1 best matchup. The Bengals just do not stop tight ends. So this is one where I think we can go through and confidently start Mark Andrews. We look down here at the Bears and the Eagles playing on Friday. There are 5-mile-an-hour winds, a little bit of a colder game. The Eagles are at home, but again, none of this weather is really that concerning for us. We have this game total here at 44.5 points, one of the lower of the week, and the Eagles are even projected to win this game by 7 points. A lot of this is because the Eagles play such a slow game, and the Bears offense has been pretty decent, hit or miss this year. but again, a lower point total is about the average. We can see here for the Bears, all things considered, it's a pretty even matchup. Like the Eagles are almost dead even in everything and all fantasy points allowed. Caleb Williams, I'm a little bit worried about. His matchups do get very, very tough for the rest of the season. DeAndre Swift and Kyle Monangai both I would consider leaving on the bench because it's going to be completely hit or miss. We saw last week DeAndre Swift did absolutely nothing. Kyle Monangai took some goal line work. That's not going to change. You're going to have to hope DeAndre Swift gets some checkdowns and some receptions out of the backfield for him to be fantasy viable. So if you have any other options because of that risk, I would be a little restrictive in where we start him in our leagues, but he does have that potential to get 20 rushing attempts if the game is close, which it isn't really projected to be. We see these wide receivers in Rome Odunze, DJ Moore, Luther Burden. DJ Moore actually does get the most positive matchup against Adoree Jackson. You can see the Eagles defense here in the notes are very, very strong everywhere except for the right wide receivers on the field. That is Rome Odunze that plays on the right side. Yes, Quinyon Mitchell is a good corner, and it's a pretty negative matchup there, but that's where the Eagles kind of funnel a lot of their success to on that right side of the field. So Odunze can be started, even though he's been very boomer bust so far this year. Luther Burden is increasing his snaps. He's becoming the primary slot wide receiver, but he's too boomer bust, doesn't play the most snaps yet, and he gets the most negative matchup against Cooper DeJean. And I would not lean towards starting Colston Loveland or Cole Kmet. We can see here that the Eagles are one of the best defenses in stopping fantasy points to the tight ends, but on top of that, they're both splitting snaps and they're both splitting routes run. So we don't have a clear-cut tight end one. You're going to have to hope for a couple random receptions and checkdowns, which I don't really want to deal with if we're going with the Bears here. We look at the Eagles side of things. The Bears defense is just positive in everything. We can see these cornerback matchups here. Kyler Gordon, Tariq Stevenson, they're both some of the most positive in fantasy points on a per route run basis. So AJ Brown, Devonta Smith are both going to be really positive. You can see here the Bears defense are really strong versus the left side of the field in that wide receiver. Luckily, that's Jahan Dotson, so we don't really have to worry about that. But they allow the number one most fantasy points per game to the right side of the field on that, and that is AJ Brown. So this should be a spot that AJ Brown has another really good game as long as all the off-field stuff doesn't become an issue. And we look at Dallas Goedert, another positive matchup here. He's going to be touchdown or bust. That's kind of been his thing over the past, I guess you would say, season, but he does get a decent amount of looks in the red zone, so he can be a start, as well as Jalen Hurts and Saquon Barkley. Saquon Barkley, just to note, has had his most inefficient season in a while right now. So it is a little bit worrisome for him, but he can still be started. He's a top 10 running back, just a little bit lower down that top 10 list. And we look at the Saints and the Dolphins matchup here, another pretty low game total. I mean, this one's at 41.5 points. So this is one of those matchups where you don't want to be going through and starting those flex fringe guys. And for some reason, the Dolphins are projected to win this game by almost a touchdown, which makes absolutely no sense to me. I think that spread is way too far. 2-mile-an-hour winds. The Dolphins are home, so it does, I guess, help them in that aspect, but the weather's perfect. No issues with the weather there. We look at the Saints matchup here. Very positive to the quarterbacks and the running backs. I would not start Tyler Shuck in this matchup. I don't think we have to go through that too much. Alvin Kamara is likely going to miss this game with his MCL sprain, putting Devin Neal as the RB1. That is a little bit of a risky play. He doesn't get a ton of usage on the ground. Even when he filled in for Alvin Kamara last week, he saw 100% of the rushing attempts, but he did run 37 routes. That was more than guys like CeeDee Lamb, JSN, a ton of the top wide receivers. So that's where he's going to get all of his fantasy points from in the checkdown game. Taysom Hill probably will get a lot more usage again because of no Alvin Kamara. I wouldn't necessarily tell you to put him in your starting lineup, but if you're in a deeper league, he's probably going to get some usage. But we look at the wide receivers here. This is really what's important. Chris Olave and Devon Vele, they do get pretty negative matchups. You can see here the cornerbacks are actually positive green and yellow in their matchup grades here, but they are not allowing a lot of fantasy points to the position, and that mostly is because the Dolphins are getting blown out, so you just run the ball on them and you don't have to worry about the pass. So that's why we have these cornerback matchups and the fantasy points right next to each other. It tells us the full story. So you can see here, they restrict all passing because of blowouts. So they're not really that negative. Chris Olave can be started. I would not reach deep for Devon Vele because of this low point total that is projected. We look at the Dolphins side of things. The Saints defense is actually pretty decent. We see Jalen Waddle gets the most positive cornerback matchup against Quincy Riley, but the Saints do stop slot wide receivers at a very high rate. That's really the only thing they can do. And that is Malik Washington, so I would not be starting him in this matchup. We do have a potential Darren Waller sighting coming back this week, but you're reaching deep if you're putting him in your lineup. So really, Devon Achane and Jalen Waddle are the only guys I'm liking for the Dolphins here. And we drop it down to the Texans and the Colts, our first Sunday game of the week. Another indoor stadium, So the Colts are home, positive for them. They are projected to win this game. But we saw last week the Texans can surprise some people with the defensive front that they do have. 44.5-point game total. Again, this is a little bit on the lower side, but about average in the league. The Texans offense, you can see, likely will have CJ Stroud back this week, but if we don't, it doesn't really affect the wide receivers too much. We've seen Davis Mills in his starts are targeting the outside wide receivers, so the Nico Collinses, the Jaden Higgins, a lot more than CJ Stroud was. So if CJ Stroud is playing, Dalton Schultz becomes a top start for us this week. You can see that the Colts are actually allowing a decent amount of fantasy points to the tight end position as well. Last week, he played the Buffalo Bills, who allow the number one least amount of fantasy points to the position, which is why we were sitting him and he had a dud game. So again, this video is so important to give us the entire story. Hit that like button if you guys do appreciate all the time and effort that goes into this. Woody Marks didn't really have a great game over the past few weeks despite some really positive matchups. The Colts defense is not one of those. They are more on the negative side in fantasy points allowed, so he's going to need some checkdowns to be fantasy viable. We know CJ Stroud does throw those a little bit more often than Davis Mills does, but really it is more positive for these wide receivers in Nico Collins. We have Jaden Higgins as well, who we just talked about, and Christian Kirk. A little note here that is actually a lot more important than people understand is that Sauce Gardner is locking down these wide receivers, especially on the left side where he does play. Ever since he has come to this team, he has helped that left side an insane amount. So that is Nico Collins. I'm not necessarily going to tell you that he is a sit, even if we have CJ Stroud in this matchup, because he is their primary guy, but just know that Sauce Gardner is a very good corner, has completely changed that side of the defense. It is a lot more positive for the slot wide receiver in Kenny Moore. He's a very, very positive corner in fantasy points allowed on a per route run basis. So if you need one of those safe guys, Christian Kirk can be that for you, but I would not necessarily love it because this game total is a little bit low and a lot of things can happen. I would probably lean from a floor perspective to go with him over Jaden Higgins, but if you're going for a ceiling, Higgins is going to be your option. We look at the Colts here. They allow some of the least amount of fantasy points to quarterbacks, running backs, wide receivers. It is all negative, and you can see the only note here is that the Texans defense is just amazing, which it is. We saw what they did to the Bills last week, so you're not going to want to start these fringe guys. Daniel Jones, very far down my quarterback rankings, so unless you have a top guy, I'm a little bit worried for him. Jonathan Taylor can be started. We saw last week against a very good Chiefs defense. This is a similar situation. He does struggle a little bit, but again, he's Jonathan Taylor, can be started. Michael Pittman and Pierce, borderline starts. Stingley and Lassiter are very good corners, but the ball has to go somewhere. I would like Michael Pittman better in this one because they are slightly better in allowing fantasy points to the slot, but really not too much of a difference. Tyler Warren can be started because the tight end position is so bleak, but just know it is all red in those matchups. We also have the Falcons and the Jets in this one on Sunday. A little bit more of weather concerns here because we have 6-mile-an-hour winds, a 22% chance of rain, about 40-ish, 50-ish degrees. The Jets are at home, so positive for them. And we see this is the lowest game point total that we've had in this video so far. The Jets are projected to lose this game by about a field goal. Kirk Cousins, it'll just show you how bad he's about to be with how low this game total is. A little bit chance of rain, but by the time we get to Sunday, I don't expect it to impact the game at all. It just might be a little bit of showers that we see. But for the Falcons side of things, Kirk Cousins technically gets a positive matchup. You're not starting him. Really what's important is Bijan Robinson and Tyler Algier. These guys should have a field day. I expect both of them to probably fall in the end zone. Again, it's a very low game point total, but we know Kirk Cousins is going to have to throw these checkdowns to the running backs because Drake London more than likely is not going to play. He's been ruled doubtful for this matchup. Now, he does get the more positive corner matchup in Thomas, but if he's not going to play, it's going to move down to Darnell Mooney on the outside because we know David Stills plays in the slot. And the Jets defense is very positive to that left wide receiver role. With London likely out, that is going to be Darnell Mooney. He's a borderline start. We know he has some experience playing with Kirk Cousins in this team in previous seasons. He's a flex guy. Again, I don't love it because of the low game point total. Kyle Pitts, pretty decent matchup. He can't be started just because there's really nowhere else for this ball to go. And the Jets side of things, Tyrod Taylor definitely does help all of these guys in fantasy point production. He himself is not going to be started, but Breece Hall, I love him in this matchup. He gets a top 5 one here. Also, John Mechie is looking like the number 1 wide receiver in this roster. We see he gets the more positive corner matchup against Mike Hughes. But the thing here is that the Falcons defense is very positive to wide receivers on the left side, and that is A.D. Mitchell because he's not getting that matchup. So AJ Terrell is a more negative corner in fantasy points allowed per route run, so it's a bit backwards in this, but we do know that as far as their defense as a collective goes, that's kind of where they run the offense through. I don't think A.D. Mitchell is going to be a smash start. He does drop balls and isn't necessarily amazing yet. John Mechie, he's going to be a boomer bust guy. Again, with how low this game point total is, you're hoping for a touchdown, and I wouldn't throw him into my starting lineup unless I absolutely have to. And we drop it down to the 49ers and the Browns in this matchup. This is one of those games where the weather really does become important. 7-mile-an-hour winds, not too crazy, not necessarily going to affect the game, but the rain is a 79% chance, who's probably going to build as we get closer to this matchup. 30-something degrees is going to be pretty cold. The Browns are home. And again, you look at this game point total, 38. The lowest that we've seen all week. The Browns are not projected to put up any points with Shedeur Sanders at all. So we look into Shedeur Sanders in this matchup. First of all, Brock Purdy. He did not look great last week. 3 interceptions, I believe, in the first half against the Panthers defense. They're a good defense, but so are the Browns. He gets one of the most negative ones this week. Christian McCaffrey as well in the wide receivers. You're going to be starting Christian McCaffrey. I would not start Brock Purdy in this matchup considering the low game point total and how good the Browns are. These wide receivers do scare me for the 49ers as well. Tyson Campbell and Denzel Ward are good corners. We can see in the notes here that the Browns are the best defense in slot wide receivers. So that is Demarcus Robinson. Luckily, no one's starting him anyway, so we don't have to worry about that. I would go with Juwan Jennings over Pearsall this week because of the corner matchup, but I don't want to put any of these guys in my starting lineup if I have the option to do that. So this would be the week to sit them. George Kittle can be started because the matchup is the most positive, so he's likely going to get a lot of those checkdowns next to Christian McCaffrey. And we look at the Browns side of things. The 49ers defense is very, very positive in pretty much everything. I would not go through and start Shedeur Sanders in our fantasy lineups. He definitely makes all of these wide receivers and just tight ends and everything a lot more risky. You can see the 49ers defense are number 1 in slot points allowed to slot wide receivers. So that is going to be Cedric Tillman. This is one where I think we can borderline start him. Now, I know it's going against everything that I say about this game point total. It's very, very low. But considering the way that this 49ers team runs their defense, and if Shedeur Sanders can be somewhat viable, I know he loves to throw the ball deep, which is good for Jerry Jeudy, but he gets a matchup against Diamador Lenore, which is a very negative cornerback matchup specifically. Tillman gets a little bit more of a positive one. Again, I'm not loving throwing these guys in our lineup, but I do think Cedric Tillman giving the matchup can possibly be a flex spot for you. Quinshon Judkins, neutral matchup for him. We can still start him in our lineups. Definitely drops down a little bit with Shedeur Sanders at quarterback. The touchdown upside does go down, but the tight ends are more positive. I do like Harold Fannin. David Njoku also gets the positive matchup here, but he has not been running as many routes. Fannin can be started given this situation, and we'll see what Shedeur Sanders does. It will tell us a lot. We typically don't want to run the risk of starting a bunch of guys with a new quarterback with too many questions and a low game point total. But looking at this next game here with the Rams and the Panthers, 3-mile-an-hour winds. Again, 24% chance of rain, so nothing too crazy. The weather's about normal. The Panthers are at home. None of this is anything I'd really worry about. But what I would worry about is this situation with the Rams defense, because you see they're projected to win this game by 10 points, over under at 45. We really don't know what to expect with the Panthers on a week-to-week basis, but we can assume it's going to be bad. The Rams here actually get some pretty negative matchups. We can see at the wide receivers, this is really where our eyes are going to draw, is that the Panthers are pretty good at stopping fantasy points to the wide receiver position. Mike Jackson and J.C. Horn specifically are really, really good. We can see the Panthers defense are better versus perimeter wide receivers. That's not great for Devontae Adams. They don't allow a lot of points to that perimeter because of J.C. Horn. We saw last week, I believe he had 2 interceptions. That's exactly why. Puka Nacua does get the more positive matchup, but both of these guys are relatively matchup proof, so we don't need to worry too much about it. I would start Kyren Williams in this matchup, again, with how many points they're projected to win by. He should be getting a ton of usage on the ground. Colby Parkinson is their starting tight end. I wouldn't necessarily put him in our lineup because they do run a multi-tight end system and they all run routes. We can also see Puka will destroy this team before the blowout, again, because of the corner matchup. But the Panthers side of things, the Rams defense is actually a bit more positive to wide receivers than a lot of people expect, but you can see the quarterback and running back very, very negative. So the Rams, they are great against the right side of the field. So Xavier Legette is going to be a sit for us this week. Even though they're technically positive, they stop that side of the field. A lot of it is because of the cornerback matchup, Darius Williams. We can see here that Josh Wallace is also very negative. So the slot is not a spot where they allow a lot of fantasy points either. I would not start Jalen Coker. Ted McMillan against Emmanuel Forbes can 100% be started this week. He's a top 10 wide receiver for me. But they're positive everywhere else, again, outside of this right wide receiver spot. So this is what we're going to do for the Panthers. Rico Dowdle does bring a little bit more risk, but again, he is a workhorse running back. We drop down to the Jaguars and the Titans in this matchup. Another interesting game point total, 5-mile-an-hour winds, 64% chance of rain. So this might affect this matchup and make the passing a little bit more worrisome. The whole reason we have these weather reports is because it tells us a lot of what teams expect to do, and we can kind of play our strength to that. So the Titans are home in this matchup. a lot of positive here for the Titans. With the potential rain, if this does continue to hold up and build, it could be negative for Brian Thomas Jr. if he does end up playing in this game. Now, he does have the most positive matchup against Amore Davis. Jacoby Myers and Parker Washington, they're also somewhat positive. It does depend a lot on if Brian Thomas Jr. is going to play. Travis Etienne and Bashaw Tootin get really positive matchups. We know the Titans are top 5 in fantasy points allowed to the position. Travis Etienne is a must start, especially if it does rain. That does favor the running backs for them getting more touches on a per game basis. So Brian Thomas Jr., borderline start if he does play. It makes a lot of these wide receivers risky, though. We can see the Titans' defense is bad everywhere. They're a little bit better versus slot wide receivers, as we can see here with Parker Washington. So I would not be putting him in our starting lineup if Thomas is healthy. And we can see here for the Titans that Cam Ward gets a positive matchup. You're not going to take advantage of it. We had him in the must-avoid waiver wire video earlier this week. We can see here with the running backs that the Jaguars are very, very good. They pressure the quarterback, and they have a really good fantasy point total number of restrictions on running back. So I would not be putting Pollard or Spears in our lineups, not like we would anyways. Chimere DK is actually a pretty interesting start here against Jordan Lewis. He does get the most positive cornerback matchup this week. And the Jaguars defense, as we can see, is better versus the slot wide receivers. So Alec Iomanor is not a guy that I want to start in this matchup, but this defense is notably bad against outside wide receivers, and that is Chimere DK. So I do like him. Chika Okonkwo, he does get a good matchup, but he's been splitting a lot of snaps with Gunnar Helm, so he's not a guy I would throw into our starting lineups this week. We look at this next one with the Cardinals and the Buccaneers. Another pretty even game point total at 44.5. It is projected to be a close game. Thank you to Jacoby Brissett doing everything that he does. 2-mile-an-hour winds, a good 76 degrees. Buccaneers are home. It's in Florida. Absolutely no issues with the weather there. Jacoby Brissett, very positive matchup. The Buccaneers are good in allowing fantasy points to wide receivers. They are more of a pass funnel defense. So Jacoby Brissett is a start for us. He's been a top 10 quarterback since filling in for Kyler Murray. The running back situation is just absolutely disgusting, though, because we don't really know what to expect. Trey Benson is questionable to come off IR and make his first start in a while this week. I don't expect him to, and if he does, he's likely going to be restricted in a very heavy amount. So I would not start Trey Benson even if he does come back, which is going to mean Amari DeMarcado, if he is healthy, is going to be the RB1, but he's also questionable coming into this matchup. So it leaves Bam Knight and Michael Carter. It is just a running back committee of trash. I really don't want to deal with it. It will depend on what running backs are healthy. So again, let me know in the comments if you have any of these guys. I'll give you more details as the game comes closer. We can see Marvin Harrison Jr. is questionable coming into this matchup. He gets more of a negative one against Jamel Dean. Michael Wilson gets the most positive matchup against Zion McCollum, which is really good for us because he has been the most targeted wide receiver in the NFL over the last 2 weeks. And we can see the Buccaneers defense here. They can't stop anything over the top. We're starting Michael Wilson. Like, he is their deep threat. He also is a little bit of a slant guy. Like, he does everything on the offense, as we can see. So even if Marvin Harrison Jr. does come back into this matchup, I would still be starting Michael Wilson. Greg Dortch has been averaging over 15 fantasy points per game, but I would not be starting him here. Jacob Parrish, not a great corner, but again, if we don't have Marvin Harrison, I think he's a fine start. The game total isn't too low to worry about that, and it is close. He is their slot wide receiver, so maybe he'll get a bit more looks there, but his target share relative to the amount of passing attempts Jacoby Brissett has thrown is not positive. Trey McBride gets the most negative matchup on this team, but it's Trey McBride. We're not going to be sitting him. And we look at the Buccaneers here. The Cardinals defense is pretty decent all the way through, except for the running backs and the tight ends. This is a spot where we're starting Cade Otton in pretty much every single league. It does depend if we get Bucky Irving back in this matchup for him. It really does, because maybe he'll be back, but he'll be restricted. So just watch the notes for that on the news and his injury report. I'll try to update you guys in the comments as well. But if he's playing, he might be a start, depending on how much usage they're projecting him to get, if he's restricted or not. If he is out, I do like Sean Tucker and Rashad White a little bit more, but I'm not starting them. It is a committee backfield. They're going to need a touchdown to be viable. Emeka Egbuka does get the most positive cornerback matchup against Denzel Burke, which is positive for us. We can see the Cardinals are really, really good versus slot wide receivers comparatively. So Chris Godwin is going to be a sit for us this week. He's still not working up to a full snap share yet. Tez Johnson can be started. Garrett Williams isn't a great corner. He's about average, but we can see this game total is decently high enough. He's going to be a little bit more touchdown or bust, but Emeka Egbuka is a must start, and Tez Johnson can be there if you need it. We also see this Vikings and Seahawks matchup. A lot is going on with this one that we have to unpack. You can see the game point total here is a little bit lower at 41.5 points. The Seahawks are projected to boat race this Vikings team. A lot of it comes down to the quarterback situation. But first, you can see the weather here. 4-mile-an-hour winds, 14% chance of rain. Really not an issue at all. The Seahawks are home. So we have Brosmer starting at quarterback for this Vikings team. And I actually do think it does help these wide receivers and Justin Jefferson a lot more than JJ McCarthy was. I've seen that question a ton this week. Justin Jefferson does get the more positive matchup against Josh Jobe this week for the cornerbacks, but the Seahawks defense is terrible versus the slot wide receivers. Unfortunately for us, that's Jalen Nailor. Nobody's really going to be starting Jalen Nailor, so it's unfortunate there. The worst matchup here is the left side of the field with Jordan Addison. As you can see, Tariq Woolen is a very good corner, so that's what makes that one a negative matchup. I would lean towards not starting him, number one, because of how low this game point total is. Number two, I don't know if I trust the quarterback situation yet. TJ Hawkinson, I know we don't have a lot of good tight ends this year, so he might get a little bit of a boost with Brosmer in at quarterback. Just beware that this is a lot of questions that need to be answered this week. We look at the Seahawks. The Vikings defense is actually pretty good almost everywhere. Sam Darnold, I would not throw into my starting lineup. I know they're projected to win by a lot, but if any of those touchdowns do go to Kenneth Walker or Zach Charbonnet, he could be a little bit risky, but I'm definitely not throwing him out of my starting lineups for those kinds of reasons. We see the Vikings defense is very weak versus the slot wide receivers. Isaiah Rodgers started the year really good. He's been decent, but this total defense as a whole, they cannot stop slot wide receivers, and that is JSN. I mean, I'm expecting a 30-point fantasy day for him as always. Rashid Shaheed does get the more negative cornerback matchup here, and they're also really good at stopping the wide receivers on the right side of the field for some whatever reason, likely because of the corner and the schemes that they run on defense. So Shaheed is not a guy that I'm throwing in my lineups. AJ Barner does get a bit of a positive matchup. If you need him, you can start him. I know the tight end position is very bleak. We look down here at the Bills and the Steelers. This one has one of the higher projected game totals, 6-mile-an-hour winds, 59% chance of rain though, and the Steelers are home. So if that does build and that holds up for this matchup, it could hurt the receivers a bit more, but I'll get into exactly who it hurts and why. So we look here, this game is projected to be pretty close. We do have Josh Allen coming off of a pretty bad game last week, but it was one of the best defenses in the NFL. And as we can see here, the Pittsburgh Steelers are allowing the number one most success and fantasy points to wide receivers, so there should be no issue there. Also very positive to the quarterbacks, but what they are good at is stopping running backs. They don't allow a lot of yards per carry. James Cook is still going to be started given the negative matchup, but we'll probably see a bit more Ty Johnson here, just like we did last week on third downs and in the receiving game. We have Keon Coleman questionable in this matchup, not because he's injured, because of the coach's decision of him missing practices. Porter Jr. is a pretty positive cornerback. We also see Brandon Echols, the most positive corner on this team. Khalil Shakir is a must start for me in this matchup. Again, considering how high the point total is, if we don't have Coleman in this matchup because of coach's decision, he is the number one. I wouldn't really lean to starting Shavers or any of these other wide receivers if he does miss, even though the game total is high. It's just really boom or bust with what we're going to see, and they can operate this offense off of James Cook, Allen, and Shakir on their own. Dalton Kincaid is questionable coming into this matchup. If he does play, I would start him. Very, very positive. Dawson Knox, though, if he's out, I would not be going through and putting in our lineup because he does split snaps with Jackson Hawes when they're both in there together, even though it is positive. But we can see the Steelers can't stop anything over the top at all. I mean, we just know that for a fact. We look at the Steelers team here. The Bills defense is pretty good for whatever reason against tight ends. They allow the number one least amount of fantasy points. I mean, we look at their last 4 or 5 games. They allowed Dalton Schultz to only have 1 catch. Cade Otton to only have 2. Dulcich to only have 1. It's not positive. So we know the Steelers team loves to target their tight ends. They use all 3 of them, but because of them using 3, you can't really pinpoint who's going to get the most usage, so I wouldn't start them. Aaron Rodgers is questionable coming into this matchup. We know he's a tough guy. He might start regardless, but I would start these running backs here in Kenneth Gainwell, mostly Jalen Warren, though. The Gainwell is going to be a touchdown or bust kind of guy. DK Metcalf here does get the more positive matchup against Benford for the corners. We can see the Bills defense here is really, really weak against the left side of the field, and that is DK Metcalf. So if he's fully good to go and he's healthy here, he is a start. We can lean maybe possibly Calvin Austin, but they, outside of the number one wide receiver in DK Metcalf, have just been rotating all of these wide receivers in snaps. So sometimes he'll get a ton, sometimes he won't. So he is definitely a bit more risky. But again, as we know, they're amazing against tight ends. We over here and we look at the Raiders and the Chargers, an indoor stadium at SoFi. Nothing to worry about with the weather here. It is a pretty low game total here at 41.5 points though, and the Chargers are projected to win this game by a good amount. We can look at the Raiders side of things. It is a whole lot of red. I wouldn't love starting Trey Tucker or Tyler Lockett, especially in this matchup. We can see the Chargers are very, very good in pass defense all the way through. Tucker is likely going to be the best start in this matchup considering his corner in Cam Hart, but it's just not positive. It's really not. We have Ashton Genty coming into this one questionable. If he starts, he can be in our lineups, but it's a bit risky just all the way around this matchup. We see the Chargers here. The Raiders are very positive in a lot of things, especially to the wide receivers. We see the Raiders themselves are only really good versus the slot wide receiver, and that is Lad McConkey. So if I'm going to sit any of those guys, I wouldn't say him because he is the slot wide receiver. So he gets a higher target share because of that, but he definitely does worry me a little bit. Quentin Johnson actually gets the most positive cornerback matchup against Blue Kelly. That doesn't mean we're going to trust him. Again, this game total is a little bit low. The Chargers are expected to win a lot, and he did just have a 0-point donut. I think he can be put in our flex spot, though. Keenan Allen gets another positive one against Stokes as well. Oronde Gadsden, I would be leaning towards sitting if you have the opportunity because the Raiders do stop tight ends at a good amount. The best matchup here, as we said, is going to be Quentin Johnson. I mean, they're third worst in perimeter wide receiver coverage on the left side. So there's just a little bit for you for Quentin Johnson. Hopefully he can take advantage of that. And now we have the Broncos against my favorite team, the Commanders. 43.5-point game total, but the Broncos are expected to boat race this team. 5-mile-an-hour winds, 43% chance of rain in the Commanders' home stadium. It's not expected to affect this game a ton, but if it does, it's going to be bad for Courtland Sutton out of all guys. We'll get to him in a second. He gets a pretty positive matchup against Mike Sanders still. Jonathan Jones as well for Troy Franklin. It's positive. The Commanders' defense can't stop anybody. We can see slightly stronger against wide receivers on the left side, and if this rain does become a thing, maybe Courtland Sutton becomes a little bit more boom bust. I do like Troy Franklin in this matchup, Bo Nix as well, and Evan Ingram does get a positive one, but he hasn't seen the target share to prove to us that he can be started. And we look at the Commanders side of things, the Broncos defense is amazing literally everywhere. We're not starting Mariota. I would not want to start any of these running backs. They will be touchdown or bust. Chris Rodriguez would be my lean there if you had to pick one. Deebo Samuel does get a pretty negative matchup here against his cornerback, but we can see the Browns defense versus the slot is very, very good. And if we get Patrick Surtain back for the Broncos, this could be like really, really bad. He is questionable coming into this one. We don't know if he's going to come back or not. If Terry McLaurin comes back, though, that's another issue. So Patrick Surtain is 100% going to shadow Deebo Samuel if we don't have Terry McLaurin. So he's still going to be a start, but very, very risky. I would not look to really push my buttons on any of these Commanders guys. We look at the Giants and the Patriots, one of the more interesting games of the week. 3-mile-an-hour winds expected, 36% chance of rain. So there is a possibility that it does affect the pass at some points, but really nothing too crazy. A 46.5-point total. The Patriots are expected to win this game by a healthy amount, and we can see Jackson Dart likely making his return from concussion protocol this week. Very negative for the running backs. The Patriots are very good at stopping that, so I would not put most of these guys in my starting lineup. Devin Singletary is the goal line back, so you're going to be hoping for a touchdown from him. Tyron Tracy gets a majority of everything else. But again, these guys splitting aren't amazing unless you're in deeper leagues. We can see the wide receivers here. Wan'Dale Robinson does get the more positive matchup against Marcus Jones, and Darius Slayton against Christian Gonzalez is very, very negative. Gonzalez is a great corner, so I would not be starting Darius Slayton in this one. But outside of that outside spot with Christian Gonzalez, everywhere else is decently weak, especially in the slot. And that is Wan'Dale Robinson's role, so he can definitely be started, a borderline top 10, top 15, especially wide receiver for us this week. And we can see that Theo Johnson gets a positive matchup here. He is going to be a little touchdown or bust, but at the tight end position, you can start him if you need. And all of these Patriots guys do get insanely positive matchups here against this Giants defense. May is going to be started. Trevion Henderson is started. Ramondre Stevenson, both of these running backs really took a little bit away from each other, which is what we expected when they were healthy. I'd leave Ramondre on the bench. Stephon Diggs, though, is really the story of this game for them against Phillips. Number one, some of the most positive matchups, but also the Giants defense is weaker in coverage against the slot. So Stephon Diggs, expect a good game from him. Kayshon Boutte is questionable coming into this matchup, getting flat. It's a decent one. I wouldn't throw him into our starting lineups just yet, though. And then Hunter Henry, a bit of a negative one. So I dropped Hunter Henry in one of my leagues to pick up another tight end to start. So you can do the same for you. But that's going to finish out this video, guys. Thank you so much for hopping in this game review. I will see you in the next one coming very soon. Good luck this week, and I will see you there. All glory to the man above.